I'm Brian. Welcome to Ride Rescue. From what I can tell, all these gauges work, but I don't like the look of this dash at all. So I want to just get rid of this ugly altogether. There are so many ideas going on in my head that I'm really excited about this. Take it all out and do this all custom. This shape, to tie in something to that, it's going to be a lot of fabrications. I'm going to hand build a dash for this car. I'm really excited about doing that. Something I've never done. Let's tear all this out. Windshield, everything. I want it to all go because I want to really see what I have here to work with. We'll start by taking this off. This would be a nice guide for the shape of this for the new dash that I'm going to build. Normally, I would say grab a bunch of Ziploc baggies and a black magic marker and make notes of all these pieces as you drop them into your highly detailed bags so that this will be really easy to put back together. Well, it ain't ever going back together, so I don't need to do that. Bag and tag. Now, as an amp gauge, these may be powered. I disconnected the battery just to make sure. Your oil gauge, if it's hooked up, which this looks like it does have oil. Don't disconnect that and then start the engine. You'd be spraying oil everywhere. And this temperature gauge is a whole nother story. This line goes all the way to the motor, and that will be into the intake manifold, into a head, and that'll also have to be plugged. Well, mystery solved on these two switches that were right here. The R and the T, radiator and transmission fans. They don't seem to be hooked up, or they have a fuse in line and maybe the fuses are blown, but when this thing was running and I flipped those switches, nothing ever happened. So that would have been a potential problem. I assume those radiators were hooked up to some kind of a thermostat, and they were not hooked up to anything but a switch. Trace down another button. That was actually the fire bell that was in the back. I don't know why it didn't work. Well, brake light wasn't hooked up to anything. Nothing back there. One of the cables out. Just has a nut on the back of it. They're pretty easy to get loose. Another one not hooked up. Well, that one was also hooked up to the fuse box, and it just so happened to be this is the one that was hooked up to the bell that was in the back. The back side of these, with the fuel gauge, the amp meter, temperature, these appear to all be hooked up, and they're hooked up with the old original fabric wires, and it's a nest back there. It's just a tangled up mess. So I want to gingerly remove all of this stuff because this has some value. I'm sure there's somebody out there who'll be able to put it to use. Another button that wasn't hooked up. I wish this wasn't all welded in. It'd be so much nicer if I could take this out. It's so difficult to get to the back side of this to get it all out. Wow, this piece was difficult. This is the original choke cable. It was on with a little horseshoe clip. That was really difficult to get to the back side of and pull that one off. I don't know if this is long enough. Not likely. I don't know if this could be saved if somebody would want it. It's a shame somebody cut it off right at the firewall. So all these gauges that are still hooked up with the nest of old and new wires and the light switch, definitely going to have to be careful in removing all that. I want to be able to keep this running. I want to be able to start it. So disconnect the wire, check it, disconnect the wire, check it, and then make sure that all of them are wrapped so we don't have a fire hazard. Man, that was probably the hardest one to get off of everything back there. Okay, we got a button right here that's hooked up, and I don't know what it does, and I've got the switch. So this would be a good stopping point for now. I want to get this steering stuff out of the way, and this aftermarket turn signal switch is here, and there's a lot of wiring there that I want to be able to save. Somebody tried to glue in the horn button. It says tiny little screws that held that mechanism in place. Typically you can use a puller, but with these tiny little screws, I don't know if that would really work with the puller that I have. I might have to rig something up, but sometimes if you loosen up the nut just enough so that it's not touching, you can get the steering wheel to come off. But make sure that nut's on there, because if it comes off, it can hit you in the face. It takes a lot of work sometimes, a lot of pressure. Getting into this wiring, it looked pretty tidy underneath this dash, but it is a disaster. This was a ticking time bomb, fireball, just waiting to happen. A lot of high amp wires, some thick heavy gauge wires that are routed underneath this dash that don't belong. This kind of stuff should have been done on relays. Have one high amp wire and then relay out, or just run piggybacks or a fuse box or something. Same thing here. We've got a major bird nest. All the wires coming out from under the dash or going to and from the dash, and then going into this cluster. A lot of it I can't even make any sense of. And then it goes back across with this yellow wire, which has a splice and a splice and a splice running across some high heat areas. As it comes across this side, this just had a plastic loom like this one on this heavy gauge yellow wire, and these wires went nowhere. But what's even more disturbing, we have an exposed wire that's power. We have another exposed wire that's power. And then this cluster of wires, you can see, exposed. So we've got a high gauge wire with all these odd connections coming off of it that were clipped, that are just a major fire hazard. And there are more wires that are just dangling in here. And then what's kind of crazy, this could have left me stranded on the side of the road while I was driving it and working on it. This is the fuel pump. It works when it wants to. Well, that's because it's grounded to the manifold. And it wasn't even tight. It was just loose. So yeah, all this wiring needs to be pulled out. I wanted to keep this running mainly so that I could sell it. I wanted to be able to start it up if somebody wanted to hear it run. I'll keep it partially wired so that it will run, just so that I can sell it. But if nobody ends up wanting to buy a 4-cylinder Pinto motor, then it's going into the trash anyway. So I'm not going to give it a whole lot of time to sell it before I just start ripping all this out. So, with that all in mind, this phase 1 project has now stepped into a phase 2, where it needs a whole lot of work. Do I need to tear it all apart to do that? No, I don't. But that just kind of gives us the idea of what you can do, leaving it all together. Pull the engine and transmission out, swap it, do a lot more work without completely pulling the body off of the chassis. Well, with what I have planned, that's where I'm headed. A lot of cars you don't really need to take the body off the chassis unless you've got a lot of rust repair work or some frame work. Some real reason, high-end show a body off restoration for concourse to elegance, going all back to original. Well, this one I want to modify the frame for the front suspension, but it's got a lot of hack marks in the frame with the engine mounts and the transmission mounts that need to be fixed. And the easiest way to fix that is to take this body off. So then I'm going to start looking at some modifications. So this has just turned into a major phase 3 project that I am really excited about. So when it comes to making it drivable and something that you could feel fairly proud of to take it to a car show, that's where this phase 1 whole idea comes in. And I did it with my Buick. I'll put a link below of the video series that I did for my Buick. I wasn't doing actual video back then. I just took literally over 1,000 pictures of that build. So my hope was to find a car that was different and unique that you didn't see a lot of in all the car shows, and I wanted to buy it from the West Coast where there wouldn't be a lot of rust, so it would be something that I wouldn't have to do a whole lot of work on. And I found the Buick. Car looked good in the photos. It was a good 10-20 footer. It looked good from that far away. And all I needed to do was just some little beautification to it. It had a pretty straight body. It had fairly decent interior. The carpet was all bad, so it's similar to this. Put in new carpet, make some changes in the interior, update some of the issues. There was a lot of issues that the windshield wipers didn't work, the headlights didn't work. When I bought the car, the guy said, "Oh yeah, you can drive it home. Drive it from LA to Salt Lake, no problem." And there was a lot of problems. The guy lied to me. Similar to this one. So taking that car to that next level, which was still within what I would consider phase 1 of beautification and still keeping it drivable, tinkering and working on it while I drove it, I wanted to put some really nice tires and wheels on it. Coy's Wheels manufactured wheels not too far from my house, and I ran into them at a car show and they said, "Yeah, bring it down, we'll fit up some tires and wheels for it," because I wanted them to fit in the wheel wells. I wanted to be able to lower the car. I like a low stance, and I put great big tires and wheels on it, and they're going to scuff and rub, so I wanted it to tuck in nice and then just lower it a little bit. It turned out beautiful. The tires and wheels were perfect on that car, and it was so nice that I was able to slam that thing all the way on the ground. And that was when I first started working at the hot rod shop, and they taught me into putting air ride in it and literally slamming it on the ground. It was way cool. It looked fantastic on the ground. It drove great, but that was almost the death of that car. there's so much tweak and movement in air ride that I just about broke the car in half. I found out where all the rust issues were. So go back, look through all that, and then you'll see what started out as a phase 1, keep it drivable. Then I was starting to look at, okay, let's go into phase 2, let's put on some nice bolt-on features, air ride, and maybe change the interior, keep the body the way it is, to an absolute full-blown body off phase 3. So, like I say, I'll have the link below and you can go through that. I got really carried away when I got to phase 3. Really, really carried away. And that's what I want to kind of educate people about when they get involved in a project like this one. What are your skills? What is it you can do? What tools do you have? How far do you want to go? And where do you need to back off? Because going from a phase 1, doing a little bit of work, keeping it drivable, to a phase 2, when you start doing things that are a little bit beyond the stock vehicle. I want to start getting into some custom suspension, bolt-on stuff. This rear end is horrible. It leaks really bad, the gear ratio is all off. I want to change this rear end. I'd like to put in a Ford 9-inch. It's not that big a deal. Mostly bolt-in stuff. Got to change the driveline. Well, what about the engine and trans? Changing out the trans. I want to put in 4-speed. I want a V8. I want to lower the nose. The front suspension, it doesn't work. There isn't bolt-on pieces for this. But the car that you're working on, are you working on a Chevelle? There's a lot of great aftermarket bolt-in pieces that would be perfect for a phase 2 vehicle. Bolt right in. And then you can still drive it. It could be a weekend project. Do the front end on one weekend, do a rear end on another weekend. Those are the kind of things that are great for that keep it drivable whole project. But when you're in phase 2 and you're wanting to keep it drivable and you start doing body work, that's when you have to be cautious. Because I saw a lot of it when I was in the hot rod shop. A guy would come in, it's a father and son project, we're doing all the body work, they did great rust repair, they did a lot of good filler work, they primed it, and they just want it painted. A good paint job's $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. But a lot of hot rod shops, paint shops, won't paint it for you. They don't want to take that risk. We had a 69 Nova a guy brought in, beautiful body work, beautiful primer, sanded smooth, it looked great, scuff it and paint it. Disaster. Never do it again. The paint came off a couple months later. Came back to us, he's all pissed off. What did you do? You screwed up. You ruined my paint job. Well, it didn't bond. Whatever he used for his primer, he said he used good quality stuff. It looked like good quality stuff. The paint didn't bond. It was just coming off in big flakes and chunks. So a lot of places won't paint a car for you. You can't bring it in and say, okay, I did all the body work, here you go. You can straighten out all the bare metal. You can put in filler as long as you use a really good quality filler and you show, here's the filler I used. Some shops will then finish priming it and painting it for you. But there are still a lot of shops that won't. And you can do all the body work, leave it rough, bare metal, and they'll do that. A lot of shops will take a vehicle that is bare metal, so you could straighten things out or weld in patch panels, but you still have to be careful of the expense going forward if you're going to take a car all the way down to bare metal. My Buick, for example, was 1,500 hours. If I would have taken that car to a shop and said, this is what I want done to the car, and have them build it the way I build it, it would have been a $125,000 car. So, are you prepared for that? Now, if you want something that is just absolutely a showstopper, that is going to go on the award-winning circuit, like Kindig Design, you better be prepared to fork out $500,000. That's what he's quoting right now. I had a friend that took a 55 Chevy pickup to him and said, I'm ready to get this built. Give me an estimate. $550,000. He had Dave quote that same truck 5-6 years ago, and it was $100 grand, and he about had a heart attack with that. He's saving his money. He's all ready. He's going to have one of the best in the best build it, and his prices went way up because his shop is full, and he has the notoriety now of being one of the best in the business. So, do you want the best of the best? Even a so-so shop is going to be pushing 6 figures if you just take a car in and say, here it is. So, how much can you spend? What are the rates around the area? $60 an hour, $130 an hour? There's a huge range there. I work with a shop that does fantastic metal work, does great body work, does excellent paint. They're quoting right around $100 an hour, $80 to $100 an hour. So those are the guys you need to see and find out first before you really tackle a major project when it comes to painting. Know what you're getting into, know what your expenses are before you start tearing it apart, before you start cutting holes or taking off all the paint. Yeah, you can get it all down to fairly smooth and get it all in primer and it's sellable, it's drivable. But taking it to that next step of having it a really nice car, something you can really be proud of, just know the costs that you're getting into first before you do that. And then, do you want custom or do you want to go completely back to original? Well, now that I know I have to completely rewire this thing, I knew it was bad, but until you start really digging into it, you don't know just how bad it is and how close you are to going up in flames. There's so much that needs to be done with this, it only makes sense to take the body off the frame, modify a lot of this sheet metal to make it all fit better and look better before I put it all back on. And then you have to start looking at what tools do you have if you get into that. What skills do you have? I'm going to make a handmade one-off dash for this car and do some modifications to the panel fitment and alignment, doors, door gaps, chassis. Oh, we'll get into all that now. Alright. Guess I need to clean up and start preparing for just blowing this thing all apart. And there's that caution again. What is the game plan? How long do you want to do this? How much time do you have committed to a stage 3 project? Look at a lot of work. Could be years if you haven't got the ability to take time off from work, work your weekends, work after your work. Maybe you're retired. I'm not. And then it comes to the money. What kind of money are you willing to spend? What kind of funds? How can you keep progressing on with your project? Not only hours, but the dollars, the expense that it would take to bring this vehicle up to the desires that I have. I paid $8,000 for this. When you start looking at $12,000 engine, $3,000 transmission, $2,000 rear end, disc brakes, wheels and tires. This, at a drop of a hat, just hit $20,000. So as you can see, it adds up really quick. If you could spread it out, do a little bit at a time, it's not as painful. But with what I'm planning on doing on this car, top, upholstery, suspension, drivetrain, body, paint, modifications, chrome, easily hit $30,000, including the value of the vehicle itself. Now, a lot of the stuff that I'm taking off of this, I'm not going to reuse, I can sell. And there's probably $6,000 to $8,000 worth of parts off of this car that'll go into eBay. So there's some of it recouped, but I'm still looking at easy $25,000 to $30,000. And 100 hours, 1,000 hours. My Buick was 1,500 hours. This is nowhere near the amount of work that went into my Buick. I could easily see hitting 800 to 1,000 hours in this though. So when you're looking at 1,000 hours, $100 an hour, if you were to take this to a shop and just drop it off and say this is what I want done, you're 6 figures. Doesn't take much. All right, till next time. Appreciate you watching. Please give me a like, leave me a comment. Love hearing from you. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks again. Goodbye for now.